We're given a function here for f of x. We need to graph that function first. And then write and graph its inverse. So to start with, taking a look at function f, here is what I see. We have this equation, y is equal to 2/3 x plus 2. That's in slope-intercept form. That plus 2 that's out there on the end. That tells me that our y-intercept is at 2, which would be the point 0, 2. And then the number here in front of the x, that's our slope. So if I'm going to graph this one quickly, I'd want to use those two pieces of information to do that graph. First, graph the y-intercept at the point 0, 2. Remember, your slope is rise over run, so if your rise is positive, that would indicate your graph is going up, so up 2 units. And if your run is positive, that means we're going to need to go to the right. So using slope-intercept form to go through and do our graph, I want to put in our y-intercept at 2. And then to get more points, I'm going to go up 2 and over to the right 3. So going up 2 and over to the right 3. You could also go down 2 and left 3. That would give us more points. So we end up for the original function f with a graph that looks about like that. That is function f. We also want to write and then graph its inverse. One of the ways that you can go through and come up with the equation for the inverse is to take the original equation, which for this problem was, if I write it with x's and y's, y equals 2/3 x plus 2. If you take the x's and the y's in the original and you switch them around, you now have the equation of the inverse. However, we don't want it in that form. We need to have y all by itself. We want y equals for this inverse also. So I'm going to start taking what it is that we have here and start moving everything away from the y, so I get the y all by itself over on this side. So I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. That would give me an x minus 2 is equal to 2/3 y. And then to get the y by itself, I could divide both sides by 2/3. That would undo this multiplication that's there, but dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal, so a better option, instead of dividing by the fraction 2/3, would be to multiply by its reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply both sides of our equation by 3/2. If I take this 3/2 and distribute it into the parentheses, that would give me 3/2 x, and then 3/2 times a -2 is a -3. And now I have the exact same equation that I had up here originally when I switched the x's and y's around for the inverse equation, but I have it now, so I have y equals instead of x equals. This is our inverse equation. Instead of y, I am going to use our notation for the inverse. At least I'm going to try. There we go. So this is our same thing as saying the inverse of x. So I'm replacing the y with f inverse of x. The inverse in this problem is a 3/2 x minus 3. All right, so the original directions here were to graph each function. I took the original and using slope-intercept form, I went through and I graphed the original function f. Then we wanted to write and graph the inverse. To write the inverse, I took the original equation, switched the x's and y's around, and came up with this equation here. This equation that I have down at the bottom of the page is also in slope-intercept form, just like the original was up here. So when I take a look at this, we have a y-intercept at the point 0, -3, and our slope is equal to 3/2, which tells me, using rise over run, we need to go up 3 and right 2. So taking that information right there from our inverse equation, I should be able to go through and graph. When you do the inverse graph, you can put it on the same graph as the original if you'd like, or do it on two separate graphs, but it's actually a little better if we do it all on the same graph. So here's our inverse equation. We have a y-intercept at -3, so I'm going to go to -3 on our y-axis and put that point in. And then from there we have a slope of 3/2. So I'm going to go up 3 and right 2 from that first point that we graphed. So from this point right here, I'm going to go up 3 and to the right 2. I'm going to go up 3 again and to the right 2. After we come up with a couple of points, we will have our graph of our inverse.